I spent part one of this series focused mostly on texting. All I can say about part two is...
Gorgeous, baby! You're gorgeous!
This is the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. The show that everybody's talking about. The show that will become a necessary part of your weekly mental diet. The show that picks up where JoshRolfe.com leaves off. The show title that uses the word podcast 4 times. Introducing your host, Josh Rolfe.
Welcome to the Josh Podcast Show. I'm so happy you're here. This is going to be another super exciting episode of How to Reach Me. If you're new to this podcast, which you probably are not because you're listening to part 2, which means you probably listened to part 1, but if you are new to part 2, then here's what you need to know about me and about this podcast. This is the anti-podcast. It is about nothing like, and it's nothing like anything else out there, because most podcasts, the vast 99.9% majority of podcasts, are all about something. They have a reason for being. They have a purpose. They have a focus. They're all about getting rich. They're all about being more successful. They're all about mysteries. They're all about fictional books. They're all about whatever the thing is, that is their thing. You'll notice most comedians don't have a podcast because they just want to be funny doing stand-up. They don't want to be funny doing sit down, which is the kind of funny I'm doing, all right? And I know that talking about being funny automatically makes you unfunny, but that's what an anti-podcast does. An anti-podcast podcast is the anti of everything. And the reason God and man are in there are because I want to talk about everything. That's what that means. If you were confused, if you thought you'd get a sermon, then this is probably not the place. Although I do like talking from time to time about faithful things and science and faith and yogurt. I talk about yogurt. There's an episode on yogurt. This podcast episode on How to Reach Me continues on with the discussion about how texting is the superior way to reach me these days. But like any form of communication, there are rules, both spoken and unspoken. And as with any form of communication, there are exceptions. And it's no different with texting. There are texting exceptions. And I'm going to talk about at the beginning of this episode how my self-esteem is directly correlated to these texting exceptions, especially when I'm in meetings. So I've been talking about in part 1, at the end of part 1, there was a film script. Not sure if you were able to catch that. If you haven't, go back and listen. It's pretty dramatic. It's intense. It's a thriller horror genre. So if you're around small children, I would encourage you not to listen, although it's rated G horror. So sometimes texting, just like a phone slips through the cracks while driving, sometimes a text can also slip through the cracks, as it were, like this. When I'm driving and I get your text and I can't break the California hands-free law at that given moment, and I think of what to write back, but then get distracted by turns that make it hard to text, or brake lights that interrupt my text. But still, texting is by far the best way to reach me, except when I'm in a meeting and I haven't turned on vibrate on my phone. Actually, change that. Getting texts during a meeting makes others think, wow, Josh must be working really hard right now. as the phone sings its texting tune every other minute. I'll turn it on mute, I say to them. Bzz, 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 bing, ba-ding, ba-ding. You know when someone else actually gets the text? Ding! The little beep goes off and everyone checks their phone hoping it's them. It's like a contest. It's like a who's the grand prize winner. Josh is getting another text. He gets so many texts. He must have a lot going on right now. He must know so many people. In the times of day that I'm not near my phone, moments which have been known to happen, texting is not the best way to reach me. In that case, it's better to call. Since I was just on the topic of texts and meetings, I find it funny how a call during a meeting is less likely to leave an impression of importance than a text. Because anyone can call a phone. Telemarketers can call, the survey takers, researchers, those incredibly effective fraternal order of police that get me every time. They're like, they've got the New York thing, and they're like, hey, we just want to, and they just they're so convincing. But not just anyone can text. There's still a lot more to say about this. Like when AT&T texts me, or I get the unusual spam texts about free cruises, or there's the misdirected texts in other languages with tons of emoji and how depressing that is. I get that vibration. I get that ding. And it's no one that I know. So much more to say about this topic, but let's move on to the phone. Like I said, if you need to reach me, sometimes a call is better than a text, and that's what I'm going to talk about for this next segment of this episode about the phone. Calls can actually be quite effective at times. Like when it's an emergency, you could call. I may not pick up the first time because I don't know if it's an emergency, and I may not see your text right away. But if you call and hang up, then call and hang up, and then call again, I'll start to think, oh, wait, this must be important. Hold on, people around me. I need to get this call. Most of the time, however, it's not an emergency. In fact, I can think of maybe 2 or 3, probably just 2, emergency level calls in my entire lifetime. And they weren't really emergency level, though they were somewhat in that direction. Like an emergency level would be, I know someone who has just been through a nuclear holocaust. Like that to me is emergency level. Most of the time, it can wait. Most of the time, just a regular call is okay. Except I prefer urgent calls more than regular calls. Although sometimes a regular call is better than an urgent call. There's nothing as bad as an urgent call that ruins a relaxing moment. Just like there's nothing worse than a regular call that ruins what I hoped would be an urgent moment. I should also say I pick up calls maybe 40% of the time. I rarely pick up if I don't know the number. And I should clarify this. When I say phone, this whole time I've been talking about the phone, I mean the cell phone. And I don't want to brag here, but I have 2 cell phones, which some people take as like why do you have 2? Josh, why do you have 2 cell phones? And I don't care which one you call. One is for work and the other is personal. And because I have side stuff going on, like this podcast, I don't feel like, once that great podcast producer finds me. There isn't such a thing. There is Alex at Gimlet Media. If Alex Bloomberg called me, I would hope he would call on my personal cell phone because, he's like a big time. He is trying to start a podcasting channel where they have shows and they already have like 4 or 5 shows. So while there is a wall of separation between both my personal and my work phone, one does not infringe upon the rights of the other. That's what I mean by wall of separation, kind of like church and state, that whole wall of separation issue we hear about sometimes. There are times when one phone must be used for the other purpose and vice versa, but it usually works itself out in the end. One more thing. If you are a telemarketer, do not call my cell phone. Next, I want to talk about the home phone. If you are a telemarketer, it's best to reach me by home phone. This section is about my home phone, which now is limited to telemarketing calls only. We feel it's important to keep an open line of communication between our family and the telemarketing industry. I feel a bond with the telemarketing industry, having spent valuable time in my career working within it. At one point, selling Martha Stewart subscriptions about a day, literally a day after she had been indicted for securities fraud. While I did ultimately quit after about 2.5 hours, I feel tremendous empathy for telemarketers, so they are always welcome to my home through my home phone. There are other telemarketing jobs where I did not quit right away, like calling through the phone book for 2 months. Maybe it was 3 months. It could have been 4 months, getting leads for salesmen for a collections agency. It was like a startup. A guy had been in the collections industry for years, and he decided to launch out on his own, and he put out an ad for a telemarketing job. And so I was going through the yellow pages. I went through the white pages, all the business listings in that phone book, and was trying to get leads for his salesperson. That was a really tough job, especially when I started going through the telephone book for this second time. That was my first telemarketing job. My next one was with a mortgage company doing the same kind of thing, getting leads for the sales reps. I used a phone book for that one. Mortgage rates at the time were about 6.25%. It was late 90s. I forget how that one ended up. I know there was another. I told you I had several telemarketing jobs. It was really hard work. I'd pick up the phone. I'd call that phone up. The first call you make is always the most difficult. I love telemarketers because of that, especially the good ones. And there's a number of telemarketer types, but my favorite are the ones that are real. They're just themselves. You can tell they have that authenticity about them. That is what I appreciate in a telemarketer, realness. The other kind I love are the ones that read their script like really bad actors. Like, hi, is Mr. Rolfe there? This is Simon with Can Cold Collect, and I'm sure you are busy and want to respect your time, so I'll be brief. The reason for my call is this. We specialize in working with homeowners so they can lower their mortgage to something a lot more affordable. That I know of, telemarketers still get lousy pay like I did. Be nice to telemarketers. Open up a line to your home so you can speak to them directly, and be kind. Be kind to them. There have been ample articles in recent years discussing the death of voicemail. Apparently, not many people check voicemail anymore, but I happen to be one of the few who still checks his voicemail as soon as I can retrieve it. I happen to enjoy voicemail. I may not listen to it all the way through if I'm distracted, so please enunciate and ensure you are leaving the message indoors, away from a noisy environment, using a landline or a cell phone with a strong signal, and getting out your main idea in the first 4 or 5 seconds of the message. Don't just say, hi, it's so-and-so, call me back. tell me why you're leaving the message. Like you, I am not a fan of obscure voicemails. I need to know a little about why you called before I decide if and when I should call you back. If you can't reach me by any phone and it's not an emergency, then email is definitely best. Emails should follow certain guidelines. I'm really picky about this. Don't be too short. Don't be too long. I appreciate decent spelling and grammar. A little thought and care in your email message goes a long way. I have a hard time with emails that address me but don't use any punctuation after my name in the salutation. Like if you're Robert Bob at neither here nor there.biz and the subject line is such and such and it's written to me, my email bad-dog blank at blankbiz.biz. Can't describe the blank there out of privacy concerns. Josh, where Josh doesn't have a colon, a comma, a hyphen, nothing after it. It's just Josh. Per our conversation, can you check to see if so-and-so can do such and such here or there from time to time, and if he or she has come and gone on this, that, or the other thing? Robert Bob. In this situation, where my name just hangs there, it's just Josh with nothing holding it up. Please avoid the hanging salutation with no punctuation after the name. You should include a comma or colon or hyphens following my name to support it up there at the beginning of your note and not allow it to float alone like that. I can get a little picky about the emails I receive. In other words, I'm judging you by the content of your emails to me. Just don't try to sound smarter than me in an email, because then I won't judge you. I'll judge myself and realize how much dumber I am than you. Sometimes email doesn't work and texting can be too slow. If you need to have a quick, fast conversation over instant messaging, lately I've been enjoying Facebook's Messenger app. It's a quick way to get back to me, and I like the big thumbs up feature. When you press and hold down the thumbs up emoji, it gets bigger and bigger until it pops. That's cool to use, with moderation, of course. Really happy about that blue thumb, Mark Zuckerberg. Here I am saying this as a 40-year-old man, that I like the big thumbs up feature. I can't imagine my parents at 40 saying that. I mean, our times have really changed. Every series, and this is a 3-part series, and this is part 2. Every series needs a cliffhanger. This is the cliffhanger that I'm going to offer even more ways to reach me in part 3 of How to Reach Me.
Thank you for listening to the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. For more information, visit joshpodcast.com. Follow Josh on Twitter at Josh Rolfe. That's Rolfe, R-O-L-P as in podcast, H. Now go and have the best day and night ever. And have fun.